Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Smallville Season 1, Episodes 19 and 20. So, Episode 19 goes on to give me the OC closure that I never knew I needed. Because, of course, if you guys don't remember the show The OC California, here we come back from where we started from. California. The OC. Plus, also, here's the thing. I went on and like the OC ended up kind of being like Smallville, where I watched like the OC like consistently when it was on TV. And for some reason, because of like the Olympics and a billion other different things, all of a sudden like I couldn't find where the OC was on TV anymore. And so later on in life, when I had this thing called Dollarinos, I went on to buy every single disc set of the OC to watch how that show was to go on and end, and thought it was a pretty decent ending for the show. There were certain characters where, of course, like you could be heartbroken of why they ended the story the way they did, but it is what it is. But yeah, this episode gave me some OC closure, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. Here's also the thing. I finally figured out why Lex turned to the dark side and became a villain. And it straight up comes from every single time that that Jonathan would go on to refuse any gift that Lex had given him at this point. Hey, Jonathan, here's a truck for you to just drive around. Jonathan's like, no, I think you need to return that. Hey, Jonathan, would you like some shark tickets? No, I would rather go fishing. Just return it. Hey, Jonathan, here's money. Here's just straight up money. You can take this money towards your cattle and towards your land. Jonathan's like, no, I don't like money either. Just you keep that. Hey, Jonathan, here's a Starbucks gift card because it's your birthday. Happy birthday. Lex, that's great and all, but I don't really like Starbucks. Here's the gift card back. Jonathan, do you know how tough it is to return all of these items? Do you know how hard it is to put money back into a bank once you've taken it out? It's tough. It really is. And so Lex had become a crazed, villainous man, clearly because of Jonathan Kent. The years upon years and seasons upon seasons that Jonathan would continue to return gifts from Lex consistently. As I'm breaking character here, because it's funny, Lex had become the villain because of Jonathan. And that also, Clark would consistently in the later seasons, consistently wear the same clothes as his father. There's a reason why Lex, at some point, did not like Clark also. That is the whole spin behind this show. So, because Lex got confused about whether or not things were to happen the way they were with Jonathan, and every time Lex was to see somebody just in those coat and wearing those gloves, it's like, oh no. Anyways, so episode 19 was really good. We of course have an episode that's probably going to be in my top 10 favorite episodes. but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of others that might just kind of push that aside just because there might be some really good episodes. So I'm going to kind of keep that to say it's like it's a good episode, but I don't think it's going to make like third slot into favorite. But then episode 20 turns around and it's really just farting in the wind filler. We do have Lana become the freak of the week, and that has got to be the best part about this episode. But here is the worst freaking part for me, is now we go on and we have to do the whole octagon silver, yeah, this metal is of no metal on this planet. Who cares? Like, was it an outer space ray gun? No. So, who gives a rip about an octagonal shape that's from, like, nothing of this earth? How is that going to benefit anybody? Anyways, so episode 20, like, sucked because it's also going to start out that story about the whole thing with the caves, and I think Lionel is gonna, like, somehow be tied to the whole cave thing, and he's gonna, like, push Lex aside, like, I want to be a part of these caves, and I want to be a part of these caves. And so that, like, there is some good episodes during the whole cave thing, but still, I'm like, oh god, we're getting to the cave part. Can I just ditch that whole cave thing and just, like, can we skip all those episodes? I really just don't like that story arc. I just loathe it. It sucks. In all honesty. But I guess there's a good payout of it, with, like, Clark eventually flying around, but all the other crap we have to just kind of just deal with. It's just, So, with that said, teeing up what are these episodes about? So, episode 19 is to deal with Justin, who's getting sick Gaines. Justin Gaines, played by Adam Brody, who is to be this artist, it seems, that is to have this Doctor Strange-like story, and which I thought was really cool. So, Justin, it seems, is to be this artist who is to have this car accident that is to cost him his hands. His massive hands. So, because he's gotten sick Gaines. So, Justin goes on, and I knew I was going to make a joke numerous times over about Gaines, because it sounds like a silly name. But probably looking at it during that time period, there wasn't like, yeah, Gaines, yeah, like sick Gaines, like there wasn't that joke probably around that time period. But now there's like Swole and Gaines and all these like goofy gym jokes, I guess, at some point in our lives. So Justin is to seek revenge from his past, which leads him to make his way back into the Smallville school to meet up with Chloe, who he had gone and done some cartoon comic strip work for Chloe for the Torch, and come to find out Justin and Chloe had been pen pals or whatever you want, like had tweeted one another or whichever for a long stretch of time. And so Justin, it seems, is wanting to go on and get with Chloe now that he is back in town, and all of a sudden Clark is now getting a little jelly. He's getting a little jealous because now that Chloe has somebody, now Clark wants Chloe. He didn't really care before, but also Clark, honestly, is kind of a C blocker at some points in this show. It's blatantly obvious. Oh, Lana's with Whitney? I gotta wreck that up. Oh, Chloe's now with some guy, Sean, Justin, whoever. I gotta figure out how to break that up. I gotta go on and defeat them and have them get arrested so Chloe doesn't go on and get to find love in this show. So with episode 20, we have, of course, Lex. That is... Oh, we also have a big story going on with Whitney in episode 19. Let's if like from time to time we always have to have some big thing going on with Whitney, and hopefully at some point before a number of seasons happen, I'm gonna go on and try to get a thumbnail with Whitney in it, because heaven forbid, there's so many times where there's a big Whitney story and I don't have like a Whitney thumbnail. Every single time there's always some like image that I'm like, I want this as a thumbnail, because it either, like in this case, it looked funny, or in other cases I'm just like, but man, that looks like a really cool image. I'm gonna slap that one down and put that one on there. So, in episode 20, we have Lana finally become the Freak of the Week. And so she does not actually get the best power, I'll admit that. Like, she didn't get, like, super strength, but at least, like, there are certain other powers that are kind of garbo that at least she didn't get that, so we'll admit that at least Lana, like, kind of won in the whole rando lottery of powers that she could have gotten that week. Luckily, right? But episode 20 focuses on Chloe being kidnapped. So really, I was kind of like this seems like a stretch. Like, we're really stretching with this episode. But not only that, we also have Lex, who is to try to figure out Pilot Past and figure out that there is a possibility that there might have somehow been a alien spacecraft that was to have landed upon Smallville, as well as a octagonal shape that we have to give a crap about for a number of episodes. So, and with that said, Jonathan has also returned 20 gifts that Lex has by now given him within these episodes. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to just go on into that double 5 time territory, because it's about that time again to go into spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil these episodes. Let's go into it. So, in the very beginning of this episode, we have Justin, who is to be trying to go on and paint a self-portrait. I believe. I can't really tell. So, Justin, it seems, is to be drawing, and this doctor is, of course, looking over him. And so, come to find out, this doctor is the one who was to do the procedure upon Justin's hands. And I guess Justin is to turn around and find out that this doctor had gone on to have a number of lawsuits after this doctor had gone on and done these procedures. And so Justin is to immediately realize that this doctor had also ruined his life as well. And so the doctor just goes on and tells Justin, it's like, well, hey, like, if anything, like, I was to, of course, go on and be this person before, and someone ended up telling me that I have the hands of a doctor, So, like, I went on and changed my path, and so now you should do the same, Justin. So, the doctor goes on to speak with his hot lady in an elevator. Whoever hot lady was, not quite sure, but she was there. So, the lady that the doctor was with had mentioned it's like, oh, like, are you talking to another grateful patient? And the doctors go on and say, yeah, uh, like people are just so ungrateful that I saved their lives and and so on and so forth. So come to find out, we have Justin who does have this other portrait of this doctor. And so Justin is to take this one marker and is to draw red onto this doctor's hand. And so all of a sudden we have a moment like Speed where the elevator is to stop. The doctor is to try to go on and open up this elevator door and push this woman out of the elevator. And once he tries to go on and he tries to get out of the elevator, all of a sudden, his hands, both of them, end up getting smushed and ripped out. And now this doctor is to probably die from bleeding to death, while at some point someone is to come on and try to save him. So he's going to die from bleeding to death. And I don't think he's going to be a doctor anymore either. Cue the title screen. So we, within the story, to eventually go on and have Justin make his way back into Smallville. And so Justin is to meet up with Chloe. And so Chloe is like, well, hey, are you ever going to go on and draw those comic strips like you did before? And Justin is going to show Chloe his hands, like, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen anymore. And so Justin and Chloe go on to the torch, and at some point we have Clark who sees both Chloe and Justin kind of chatting, and accidentally Justin is to drop all of these things because of his hands. And so Clark notices a newspaper clipping of this doctor who is to lose his hands in this elevator accident. And Clark is just like, okay, this seems suspicious. So, with that also going on, we have Lex who makes his way to his mother's grave, where he goes on to put a flower on his mother's grave, and then all of a sudden, coincidentally at the exact same time, we have Lex meet with a girl named Pamela, who has probably severely been stalking Lex for years now, really just to go on and finally ask Lex for his forgiveness about what had happened with his mother, which we don't even understand what she's talking about. So, Lex is to walk away from this woman, but come to find out he really does truly love her, even for what had happened. And come to find out, Lex is to hear from his father when Lionel is to make his way to talk to Lex about Pamela and tell him that Pamela is dealing with cancer, and more than likely Pamela was just trying to come back to the Luthers to try to shake them down for money, because she needs to pay for her doctor bills. And supposedly Pamela had gone on and taken a number of stocks from the Luthers, but I guess that may not be enough to pay for her medical treatment. So Lex is to have heard from Pamela herself that if Pamela was to see Lex again, Lionel would go on and like basically disown Lex, like disinherit Lex. And so Lex is to ask Lionel, "Hey, is that true? Were you gonna go on and do that, Dad?" And Lionel's like, "Well, of course not. You're my son." So Lex is to go on and meet with Pamela and want to be there for Pamela. And so I thought that was really nice. That Lex kind of went out of his way to just be like, well, like, I may not forgive this person, but I'm still gonna like stick by them because they're going to die at some point eventually in this story. And so now that Clark is to realize that Chloe is with somebody, we have Clark that is going on and talking with Lana, and Clark talks to Lana and is to mention that he does feel jealous that Chloe's with somebody because it seems like there were so many opportunities in the past where Clark could have been or should have been with Chloe and should have said yes to a relationship with Chloe in the past easily. I don't know how many times in so many episodes that Clark knew something that, like, one, Chloe liked Clark. Chloe was trying to get a pink dress for Clark and go to this dance. And two, Chloe kissed Clark in a episode with the Handshake of Doom. And also it seems that Chloe is consistently trying to get herself alone with Clark consistently, as probably well as a number of other people throughout this show, so they can be on the show a little bit more, but still. So Clark, of course, is to know that everybody in this episode is kind of going through this like restructuring phase, this rebuild phase with their characters. And so Lana is going on and saying the same thing about her and Whitney, how she's starting to rethink their relationship together. But there's so many times that Lana is going to just, there's always going to be some Whitney story, there's always going to be some Whitney thing that she, of course, needs to stay with Whitney because of something, that she could not be like a horrible person, just say like, okay, let's cut this off now, like, and here is, of course, why. So when it seems that Clark is going to finally say that he wants to be with Chloe in this episode, all of a sudden Lana is rushing to Whitney saying, "Whitney, we need to talk." And Whitney ends up telling Lana, like, "My father just died." It's like, oh, freaking Whitney, who has just lost his dad. Like, luckily we had that amazing moment in the last episode with the whole football and, like, Whitney's dad, and, like, that was great. but then we sadly turn around and have Whitney lose his father here, which maybe a lot of people like needed this episode because maybe they had gone on and lost a loved one, not necessarily just their dad, but anybody. Maybe this was like an episode uh, or number of episodes that they needed. Who knows? During that time, during that hardship. So we have Clark, who is to start making theories and start C blocking some people. Because the C stands for Clark. Clark blocking. So Clark goes on to meet up with Chloe while also I think Pete is there at the same time. So, and I think also through this episode we find out that Pete is to have a date for the dance, and I love the fact when Pete is going to tell Clark, it's like, hey, how about we do one thing and just not be freaking lazy, and we go on and just find a date, and like, isn't that great, Clark? Isn't that a drastic change to just actually go out and find a girl and just ask her out, kind of thing? I thought that was kind of funny. So Pete ends up getting a date for the dance. Freaking great. But I also feel like Pete is also rubbing that in Clark's face, but he probably deserves it anyways. Oh, Clark. Pushing on. So, but that doesn't happen right here, but I just wanted to add that in there quickly. Out of the order, I get it, but it is what it is. So, Clark is to go on and tell Chloe about the suspicions he has about Justin, about the whole picture of the news report about Justin's doctor and how he had to have lost his hands. And so Justin is right behind Clark because Justin is always behind Clark. It's just the way it is. So Justin is to go on and want to tell Clark, it's like, well, hey, like, why aren't you telling this to my face instead of telling it to other people? Like, just ask me about it. And so, but there was no way for Clark to have figured that out. Like, yeah, it was coincidentally in the same, like, area, but, like, how could have Justin gone on and, like, done any kind of murder until someone finds out that Justin has powers in this show, which we will. So, and I think I've covered all of the other, like, the Talon moments, I think. So, like, yeah. So, the next thing we have here is that Chloe ends up finding out that Justin has superpowers by having at some point where both Justin and Chloe are to kiss, because Justin is going on and talking about how, like, all those messages and all those things that Chloe sent, Justin really meant a lot, so on and so forth. And so they end up kissing, and all the items start floating into the room, and then they fall, and Chloe's like, what was that? And Justin goes on and tells Chloe right away that he's like, well, you know what? Like, after my car accident, it seems that now I have, like, these powers to make things float. And Chloe ends up accepting that Justin has powers and is okay with it. And Justin's like, well, like, I was kind of, like, worried that I would tell you that I have powers because I don't want to become another of your, like, freaks on the wall kind of thing. And Chloe's like, no, like, I wouldn't do that to you. So Chloe goes on, and so Justin uses his power to draw Chloe, and I think at one time he tries to use his own hand to try to kind of do a little tweak of this drawing, and he ends up he ends up messing it up. But then when he redraws Chloe, like he uses his powers to, and I thought that was a really cool visual. But there's also a really funny visual also. Uh, we had Clark, who is trying to figure out the female psyche. So he ends up trying to read this book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are For Venus, and Lex stumbles upon Clark reading this book. And he's like, "What are you reading this book for?" It's like, you couldn't have gone on and read that book, She's Just Not Into You, or also the real book that should make a lot more sense for the show, that it seems like two women are really into you because they are. Dane Clark, are you so lucky? That should be the title of the book. So Lex just kind of looks at this book and he's like, "Are you serious? You're reading this? Like, come on, Clark, figure it out. Put the pieces together." So that ends up happening in the show. And kind of Lex is trying to mentor Clark about trying to figure out women. And I don't think Lex is honestly like the perfect candidate for that because of how many brief relationships he's had in the past, as well as like Lex is to probably be way more experienced than Clark with getting women and keeping them for a much longer time than probably Clark has through most of the show. Even marrying some on certain occasions. Lana. Anyways, so, but moving on. So, Justin is to also tell Chloe and Clark that he was to have difficulties remembering anything about the accident, but he could probably remember some of the license plate was DDI. And so, like, okay, maybe we should look into that or tell the police something. So, come to find out, Justin was to track down this car, probably using his powers. And Justin was to figure out that the owner of the car was Principal Kwan. And so, Justin is to have this be a hit and run situation. And so, Justin is to be upset with Principal Kwan and is to take Principal Kwan's car, start it, run him down, so that way Principal Kwan can feel what it's like to be hit by this car like he was, because the guy wasn't paying attention. And so Principal Kwan gets hit by this car, and it thrashes him through his garage door, and Principal Kwan dies. R.I.P. Principal Kwan. R.I.P. We kill off a character that had been in a number of episodes that usually tied to him being upset with somebody for whatever reason. It was either Chloe or the Freak of the Week or somebody, but sadly enough, they go on and they kill off Principal Kwan, that had been a character that has been consistently used within the show. Sadly enough. So, and I'm trying to think here if there's a number of things that I've not said yet. So come to find out, Clark. No. Come to find out, Chloe was to make her way to Justin's place. And Chloe at some point is to notice that Justin has this comic book called Justice. Or like every single time it ends up like saying the words justice consistently. And so Chloe picks up this book, this comic book, and it ties in all of the events of what he had gone on and done within this episode by killing all these people using his power. So Chloe has to go on and tell Clark that Justin has these powers and that Clark was right all along about Justin. So we also in this episode are to do Whitney's father's funeral, where we have Clark very much in the rain because he didn't realize that he should have an umbrella. Most of the other people are all having their umbrellas. Probably with the consistent fake rain that is happening here. Probably a number of people probably got pneumonia during this whole scene for how long they had to wait in this rain and how many takes that they had to take doing all this rain stuff. And no one, of course, was to go on and drop any dirt within the hole like it normally happens within the show. Someone was to die, or any other Superman character dies. Also, they didn't go on and do Principal Kwan's funeral. It's kind of sad. But we also had a moment where Chloe was like rushing around, trying to figure out like how she should cover everything going on in the torch. But she's also grieving the fact that Principal Kwan had passed away, and she was so close to him. And Clark had to figure out a way to comfort Chloe. So, trying to figure out all the things that kind of end this episode so we can go on to the other episode that really is just severely fuller. So, and I'm also figuring out like how Clark did away with Justin in this episode. Was it just him getting arrested? It must have been. Oh, no, wait. Yeah, I figured out what happened. So, Justin was, of course, to go on to use his power, and Clark meets up with Justin because Clark had figured out that it wasn't Principal Kwan's person himself, whatever. It wasn't Principal Kwan, it was actually Principal Kwan's son, and Principal Kwan was covering for his son. And Clark found out about that, and so Clark had told Justin that Principal Kwan's son was to turn himself in for that accident. And so I think after that moment, we go on to also turn around and have Clark just have Justin, who was to also just kind of turn himself in as well about all the things that he had gone on and done. I think they just arrest him. I don't think they do away with him much for this episode. So really, I think that is most of what happens for this one. Not exactly the best episode or the best that I can remember, hence why it's like, what happens by the end of this? But let's get into episode 20. So, episode 20 is to have Lana and Whitney horseback riding. And here's the thing that we find out. So, Krug is to mention the girl who played Lana Kristen, is to mention within Talkville that her favorite episodes were the one where like she was to deal with the horses or be riding the horses, because always the horses would do something goofy and at some point like mess up a take, or like something would happen and with the horses, and like they would just have to adjust the show because of that, or something like that, something along those ways. So especially if like a horse was just to take a dump in the middle of a take. So come to find out, both Lana and Whitney are to go on to find these people going on and doing this test with within this field. And so both Whitney and Lana are to tie these horses to this fence and make their way to see what these guys are doing. So come to find out, both Whitney and Lana notice that there is this pipe that seems to going to soon be possibly be causing an explosion. So Whitney tries to grab these men and is telling Lana, "Get the heck out of here! This is gonna go bad." So the guys realize what is going on and like, "Hey guys, yeah, let's get the heck out of here." So all of a sudden, Lana is trying to run from this explosion, and if of course we don't have those like really cool action scenes where people are walking away really cool from explosions, we have Lana who is to be jumping in the air after this explosion, and then so she falls, and we find out that Lana, of course, is to be the freak of the week, because she is to go on and see through the eyes of the bad guy of this episode, who is to have this goofy attire, this goofy, weird thing of glasses, be very weird and extraterrestrial like. It's very odd and goofy, this character, but he's wearing like this whole mask and get up the whole time. So Lana is to go into the hospital, and Clark is to look in on Lana, and Whitney, of course, is there, and he goes on to be like, "Man, like I thought that I could have finally got on and figured out a way to avoid all like hospitals, but I guess I can't." Just wait till eventually a number of people just get knocked out on this show. People are going to be spending a lot of time in hospitals in this show when everybody just gets knocked out for one reason or another. Like it'll either be Jonathan, it'll be Martha, it'll be everybody. Everybody's going to get knocked out at some point or another when Clark continues to go on and use those powers. Everyone's going to get knocked out. It's going to be fun. So Chloe is to meet up with Clark to find out if Lana is okay. And come to find out, Chloe is to find out that she has this interview or this thing for Metropolis. I think it becomes an interview, but so Chloe is to tell Clark that she, of course, is leaving, and so all of a sudden Lana is to at first have this vision about Chloe getting kidnapped by this man who we'll find out was somehow connected to that accident that Lana was a part of. And it'll be the weird thing of them using like a thing where if someone was to be involved in the accident, whoever was to touch them first, they were to be somehow psychically linked together. I like that whole idea, but it also feels like, man, did they really probably have to like research that or something to just, or either just say like, oh no, let's just make this whole thing up and like it sounds about right enough, right? So kind of like how I'm trying to make it right, right? So we now queue up Clark, Jonathan, Martha at the farm. I think we have a point where Jonathan is fixing like the pipes, and Jonathan tells like Clark, "Hey, can you rip off one of these pipes for me?" And he goes on and does so. I'm waiting for one time for Jonathan to tell Clark to do something, and he immediately just does it, and it ends up going horribly awry. Clark, can you just go on and rip this thing from off the floor? And then accidentally that starts a fire. And oh, Dad, my bad. I didn't know. So, come to find out, Lex is to make an entrance into this farm and is to finally give Jonathan the payout for the Luthor Corp barrel dumping from episode before to pay for the cattle and the land that had been ruined. And so Lex gives them this payout, and Jonathan's like, oh, I thought I'd never see that, because he probably didn't realize how much continuity this show would actually have from episode to episode, or how many times we would have to go on and reflect from episodes before and continue on, which I think is like, I think that's the thing that I like about Smallville the most, is going on and be like, oh yeah, like that is from like the last episode, or that's like 2 episodes ago, and they're just tying in something from episode before to probably kill time, but still, I love continuity in the show. I like that fact. Maybe I can go on not really give a rip about at some point when they have to tie in all of the movies and the shows together to have these big Crisis on Infinite Earths, whatever things. But I can go on and just enjoy like an episode that makes me reflect on another episode, even though that episode might not have been that good in my brain noggin. But so, Jonathan is to supposedly accept this money, even though he doesn't want to really put this money into his bank fairly quickly. But then at some point we have Jonathan who talks to Martha. Is like, you know what, I think I'm going to go on, and I think like we should just take this money and put it in our account and just like we'll finally accept this money. But then all of a sudden we have Lex in this episode that goes on to meet with Roger Nixon, and Roger Nixon is to deliver Lex this story from a guy named Eddie Cole. Eddie Cole, I guess, is to be this crop duster, and somehow while he was doing this crop dusting thing during the meteor shower, he realized that there was this unusual ship of sort. And Lex is like, well, couldn't that have been like a meteor rock? And this guy's like, this thing didn't move like one. So Lex, of course, is not exactly buying this story from Nixon, but they get around to just believing this somehow or another. So Lex buys the patch of land that had the ship crash on, and Lex is, of course, trying to have some findings, maybe finding some meteorites, and just trying to see if they could come up with anything from this patch of land. And both Clark and both Jonathan are driving past to see what these guys are doing. And so Jonathan ends up returning Lex his money back and saying, "No, I'm not going to take this." And Jonathan is to tell Clark the reason for that is because Lex had bought this land because he is trying to again find answers about Clark's ship crash landing, and Jonathan won't accept Lex's money because of that fact. And so Lark Clark has to go on and justify that and just be like, well, like, sure, like that makes all the sense in the world, Jonathan, but we're gonna be poor, we're gonna be broke, we're gonna lose this farm because of course Jonathan like we had the loan that didn't pan out. We had Lex who's giving Jonathan money and he refuses it. Lex is to try to give Jonathan like money to be able to fund his farm, and Jonathan refuses it. Where is Jonathan gonna go next? At some point, he's gonna lose the barn because even though Superman can do even though Clark can do all of his chores within 5 minutes, how is that going to save the farm? How is that going to save the farm? So Clark is to make his way to the Talon, and so while Clark is to be at the Talon, I think he ends up talking to Pete about the whole dating thing, or about the dance thing, and so I think Lana ends up asking Clark if he has gone on to ask Chloe for this dance yet, and Clark is like, no, like, but I've been meaning to get around with it. And Clark also notices that they can actually buy tickets for the dance, and I think Lana ends up saying like some kind of joke about Chloe and her possibly having a pink dress or something like that from episodes before, or like some kind of jokingly thing. So we blah, 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 blah. Oh my god, there's so many things that I still have to go on and get into here and talk about here. So let's try to cover all of them. So Lana ends up having another vision while Clark is there, and if Lana was to now see Chloe get nabbed, Lana then sees Chloe being taped and gagged. So Lana is to try to call Chloe's father to see if Chloe's okay, if she called him or anything like that. So at some point, Chloe's father is to mention that they ended up finding Chloe's car somewhere where it normally shouldn't be, so that should tell us that Chloe is to have been kidnapped here and there's something going horribly wrong. So at some point with this episode, we find out through Clark, who's trying to do some research, and he of course is, I think, with Whitney, and maybe it's probably either Whitney and Pete, or it's Whitney and Lana or something. I'm not quite sure who it was. It might have been Pete. I think Clark is to go on and figure out that there's a possibility that Lana is having some meteor power, but it might be connected to the trauma that she had during that accident. That was to somehow have her psychically linked to the person who was to go on and quickly get to Lana the fastest, and that could be going on to be Chloe's kidnapper. And so we have Clark who asks Whitney, it's like, well, who do you think it is to have been the one who got to Lana the quickest? And Whitney's like, well, it has to be one of the deputies. And so they're like, okay, who could that possibly be? So we have one of the deputies with Lana, and he is going to get some coffee. And the guy who, of course, is to be the guy under the mask is to go on and attack the other deputy and knock him out. And then he leaves. And so they're like, well, that dwindles it down to one. So, come to find out, it is actually Gary Watts. Because the other deputy was Michael Berdego. So, Gary Watts is to, of course, be the villain in this episode. So, we have Clark who figures out where Gary Watts is, and so is to make his way to this, like, closed down amusement park. And so it seems that also Lana is there for some unusual reason, because I guess she might have had a vision knowing that Chloe was going to be here, or be in this area. So what happens is that at some point Clark is to stop Lana from getting shot. So Clark is to see that Watts is to shoot Lana. Clark smacks the bullet away and comes to find out that when he tries to reflect the bullet, all of a sudden the bullet ends up going and smashing this glass, where Clark again has to go on and protect, I think, Lana again from having this glass fall on her. And so in super speed, he has to do everything. So Clark is to grab Watts and bring him outside, and all the police are now surrounding this area. And so now Lana is having a vision where she is seeing Watts pull a gun on all these officers, and they shoot him and they kill him, and that's how we end with that story. And so Chloe, of course, is now fine. It seems that also everything is going to pan out for her with Metropolis, and that it's possible that she's going to be spending the whole entire summer in Metropolis so she can work with the Daily Planet, because she's not going to go on and work with the Inquisitor. So it's kind of also funny because we have Nixon, who was to bring up the story from episodes before about Claire, who had gotten this scoop, and Nixon is like, well, hey, I thought I was your reporter guy, but Lex is like, but Claire gave me a massage. That's the difference maker. So it seems that Chloe's going to spend the whole entire summer in Metropolis, and so we'll see how that works between the two of them, if it ever does. So, excuse me. So, Clark is to also ask Chloe to go to the dance with him, and she says yes. So we'll see what episode the dance is, because more than likely, Clark is probably again going to skip out on that dance to go on and save somebody, I'm sure. So, probably Lana again. Because isn't that the only girl he ends up saving, it seems? Even when obviously, like, something is going horribly wrong with Chloe in an episode, he's like, no, I'm just going to keep going on and saving Lana. So, like, we even have a point where I think Chloe is to mention to Clark, like, how Lana focused Clark is, and how, like, Clark kind of forgets about everything else. Even somebody as open to being in a relationship with Clark as Chloe really is. Yeah, like, really, in all actuality, you gotta take with what you can get. Or otherwise, you may never get a time to take again. So yeah, make it freaking work, or otherwise it ain't gonna work. So with that said, I'm gonna go on and get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.